If you haven't been living under a rock for the past couple decades, you probably know who Donald Trump is.
It's the Donald! Oh my God!
Nowadays, he is known as one of, if not the most polarizing person in all of American politics. But there was a time where he was known more for his business endeavors, and that's something we're going to talk about today. Because there was a time where Donald Trump nearly became a NASCAR track owner. See, when you have to look at this, you got to go back to NASCAR back in the 1990s. NASCAR was the fastest growing sport in America. And on top of that, they were looking to expand. And they were expanding. You see, North Wilkesboro, for instance, an old school track of NASCAR, was sacrificed at the altar to get tracks at New Hampshire and Texas for more dates. These are areas that NASCAR traditionally was not able to get into too well. So they were looking at plenty of different areas, but there were some that they just really had trouble getting into to start out with. Two of those were Los Angeles and New York. The two probably biggest entertainment markets to possibly get in at the time in America. And NASCAR was looking to strike in any way possible. This is where Trump comes in. In 1996, Trump put his first proposition for a track out there, and it didn't get too far, but it was known as Trump Motor Speedway. It was to be built in Bridgeport, Connecticut, 80 miles from New York City, so a really easy way for many Northeastern fans to watch racing. It would include restaurants and retail shops, and he would have paid $55 million for 2,900 acres to build a speedway, the hotels that were around it, a golf resort, and an industrial park. In a lot of ways, this was kind of ahead of its time for NASCAR tracks, kind of building a track in the middle of its own little town of entertainment. Well, this didn't take off, but it did get him in league with NASCAR higher-ups, including Bill France Jr. And after 3 years, they created a plan for a track. And in 1999, it was announced that between Trump and Bill France Jr., they would make Trump Super Speedway. The initial reports for it were that it would be owned by Donald Trump and ISC. It would seat around 75,000 spectators, and it would be at least 1 mile long, but probably larger, maybe 1.5 miles, maybe 2 miles, somewhere to kind of fit in where NASCAR was expanding to when it came to different tracks. But on top of this, it would have an infield road course added on to try and get even more value out of it. Again, in a lot of ways, this is kind of ahead of its time for NASCAR tracks. Nowadays, you see tracks like the Roval or, for instance, the road course layout of Kansas as two viable options that NASCAR could one day race at, or they already race at. This was looking to be part of ISC's expansion coming out of the 90s and into the 2000s. This expansion including tracks like the Chicagoland Speedway, the Kansas Speedway, and the Kentucky Speedway that NASCAR had really been pushing. These all were 1.5 miles, so you could probably guess, at least from these reports, that the proposed Trump Motor Speedway would probably be another one of the cookie-cutter 1.5 miles. If you look at the way NASCAR was heading at the time and the attendance figures they were looking to pull in, it really fits in perfectly with that trend. But you see, we're a lot higher. He wanted a track that was 2 miles or larger, one of the biggest tracks on the schedule. And knowing the way Donald Trump is, he probably would want a track that was even bigger. He also was reported to having wanted a track with around 100,000 seats, but with the ability to expand to 300,000 or more. Now, I want you to think about that for a second. 300,000 spectators at one arena. This would have been not the highest capacity NASCAR track on the schedule. This would be the highest capacity sporting venue in human history. Almost 50,000 more spectators being able to be fit in just in permanent seating than Indianapolis Motor Speedway. This is the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, where seats are almost built all the way around both the outside and part of the inside of a 2.5 mile facility, bringing in about 250,000 people. This would be ambitious to say the least, and as Trump would be quoted as saying, it'll be the tallest building in the world sideways, a NASCAR Disneyland. And that's the nickname that kind of got brought with it for a while, NASCAR Disneyland. Now, of course, this would make headlines at the start of the whole ordeal, but from what it looked like, it seemed like Trump was starting to immerse himself in NASCAR culture. He was showing up to more races, showing up to bigger races, and one could assume probably trying to study up and seeing what stuff could be used for his track. And you see, the idea even stayed alive in Trump's mind enough that he filed a trademark for Trump Super Speedway in 2004. And what's interesting is when you look on the trademark, it says that they were being set to race automobiles, motorcycles, trucks, and go-karts. So definitely fitting the top 3 of NASCAR's series, but also fitting in motorcycle racing and go-karts more than likely at the infield road course. This, for all due respects, would probably be a giant hub for motorsports if it could get off the ground. But that's the problem. It got stuck in development hell. Now, there's not many details about it. There's not even a groundwork plan of what the track would have looked like or the layout. It could have been a D-shaped oval like Auto Club or Michigan. It could have been a 1.5 miles like Kansas or Kentucky or even Chicagoland. Or it could have been a super speedway, an actual super speedway like that of Daytona and Talladega. What's funny is when you look on the trademark, there actually is a space between the super and speedway part, more or less describing the overall area around the track rather than that of the track itself. This was definitely made to be mostly almost an amusement park with a racetrack at it. But there was no major news that had been given for years about this, even with Trump being more visible at NASCAR races. By 2007, the idea was nothing more than that, an idea. And this was finally struck down in every sense of the word with the passing of Bill France Jr. in 2007. In 2008, a year later, Trump would let the trademark expire heading into the Great Recession. And this is where Trump and NASCAR, for the most part, would part ways. When it comes to NASCAR in the New York area, the France family did try again without Trump's help. They purchased 650 acres on Staten Island for an 82,000-seat track. But between the fact that NASCAR at this point was starting to reel back from its initial surge in popularity and the fact that there was unanimous and heavy protests them being there due to traffic from the locals, this never happened. As for Trump, the next time he really met up in any substantial way with NASCAR was with NASCAR CEO Brian France in 2016 when he endorsed Trump on his way to the Oval Office. Later on, 4 years later, it would bring Trump to the 2020 Daytona 500 and then into an enormous amount of controversy through the summer, especially with NASCAR driver Bubba Wallace. Well over 2 decades later, this kind of story has been one that many people have kind of forgotten. There's not too many details about it. There's not too much that was really remembered about this, just that it was one crazy story where the eventual president of the United States could have been a NASCAR track owner. To be honest, it really wouldn't have ever shocked me had it actually taken place. There's been so much weird stuff in NASCAR, especially in the last 20 years, that Donald Trump owning a track doesn't seem that weird to me anymore. But now, with all of this being said, I want to pass this story on to you. Did you know that this crazy story almost happened, that Donald Trump almost owned a track in partnership with ISC and NASCAR? Let me know down in the comments below. While you're at it, leave a like in this video, share this video, and subscribe to my channel for more great NASCAR content like this. And also, to all of my channel members, especially you that have jumped on in recent weeks, thank you so much for your support. It never goes unnoticed. So until next time, have a good one.